concepto de mal papa. Él es el vínculo de la unidad. Él es el vínculo de la unidad.
Hola gringo, al ser una tesis elaborada después de la vacancia de la Santa Sede es discutible.
No existe el concepto de mal papa.
Hola gringo, al ser una tesis elaborada después de la vacancia de la Santa Sede es discutible.
Kind of an old school as big as this building, but it's a big one. So we have a lot of facilities, at least for roof and bedrooms to have people. And now we have a few seminarians from Brazil, from Chile. The Brazilian priest goes maybe 4 or 5 times a year to visit different places in Brazil. I try to go to the place in Chile that we visit for celebrating the Mass or for the faithfuls. That we better plan another way, no? So Father Sambor was consecrated a bishop, so he ordained me there in Michigan. So I came back to Argentina to work with my brother, who was at that time by himself, he was alone. And from there, 2003, it was my ordination, June 2003. From there to here, I am working with him, with my brother, and now with Syrian priest. And after my consecration, we had an ordination of another from Brazil. So we are 4 now. This one, the new one, is for Mass because he couldn't travel. He had all the courses for the seminary. He couldn't teach. So at that time we had 4 seminarians, and one, it was me. I was a deacon already. I was ordained a deacon in Omaha by Bishop Ibarunas. And the situation in Argentina was pretty bad for studying. So Father Julian was offered by Father Sambo at the time to receive these seminarians. And so that's why we came to the United States, to Michigan, to the Detroit area. And I finished my studies of theology there. During that time, while I was there, Father Samuel was consecrated a bishop by Bishop McKenna. And then when I was, my plan was to go back to Argentina and get ordained by Bishop Ibarunas down there in Argentina. But during that time, 2003, there was a lot of, problems, and we had 4 or 5 presidents in 24 hours. So Argentina was a complete disaster. So Bishop Ibarunas told me, all right, it's not going to be wise to go to Argentina now. So, and he wrote a letter. He kindly wrote a letter to Bishop Sanborn asking him if he had no problem of ordaining me. So Bishop Sanborn said, it's up to you. So he gave me the option, and I said, all right, if the Bishop Ibarunas is agree with that, I will be ordained here. I was ordained on June the 2003. I've been there for 1 year and a half, more or less. And as Father said, they followed the thesis. I was at that time the seminary was very free. I mean, I was allowed to follow the rubrics of Pius XII. I was allowed to choose the bishop who ordained me, even though at the last Bishop Sambor ordained me. But later on, yes, they got a little harder with that. That's history, no? But I was very friend of the bishop, now Bishop Selway. He was my companion at the seminary. I had a very nice remembrance of the seminary time. It was, they treated me very well. I felt like at my home, no? I was trying to get back to Argentina, of course, but the thesis was not a problem, and the rubrics was not a problem. After that, yes, they ask you for the thesis, and they ask you for following the rubrics of Pius X, which I'm not agree with that.
If I could just add something to that, we should not be surprised that there are differences of opinions amongst clergy, because if we could perfectly get along at every point, then what's the point of having a pope? But the pope is what unifies the church, and so there are going to be, without a pope, especially for a long time, there's going to be differences of opinion, and I want to really stress the difference is over policy and over things that are debatable that haven't been settled by the church, but on doctrine we completely agree. That's the Catholicity of the church.
I will strike the shepherd and the flock will be scattered, right?
So we have more, I tell people, we have more unity than you realize. We are in complete agreement in doctrine. But policy and debatable issues like the thesis of Bishop Gerard de Laurier, you can debate that. You can't, until the highest authority resolves it, it's a debatable question. And the church allows that. So we're talking about more questions about the papacy. What's the difference between an anti-pope and a false pope? An anti-pope is when there is a true pope and then there's some other pope allegedly elected. So basically you have to have a two-pope situation. There can only be one true pope. And a false pope is when, this Vatican II popes, they've taught outright heresy, so that they're false popes.
Today, there are what we call unfortunate divisions amongst traditionalists. That is very, very, very unfortunate. One of the things I wanted to do, I invited Bishop Davila and Bishop Espina and Bishop Wa, is that we were having a meeting and we're trying to speak about what things we can do to create a greater unity amongst the traditional groups, amongst the traditional bishops. And it starts by sitting down and talking. So after Christmas and the New Year, we'll have another meeting here in Spokane. There'll be 6 of us meeting. And we're going to work toward trying to hammer out differences. Now, there's always differences of opinion. That's always existed in the church. We can find differences even amongst the saints and theologians and canonists. Differences of opinion have always existed. But when I was consecrated a bishop back in 1991 by Bishop Carmona, I remember before the ceremony, I believe it was Father Mary Benedict came and said, Bishop Carmona wants to talk to you. I went down and he had typed up an oath that he wanted me to take. That oath was to try to work for unity amongst the bishops. And Bishop Carmona had the wisdom.
Si un papa en algún momento llega a decir una herejía, ¿en ese momento dejaría de ser papa?
No es así, porque nosotros hacemos la distinción conforme a la doctrina católica de lo que es una herejía material con una herejía formal. La herejía material sería un error dogmático, hacer alguna afirmación contra algún dogma de la Iglesia, pero digamos sin intención de negar el dogma propiamente, que puede ser producto de una equivocación, puede ser producto de un malentendido, e incluso puede ser producto de una opinión personal, como maestro privado, ¿verdad? Nosotros no sostenemos, le agradezco la pregunta, porque nosotros no sostenemos que solamente porque en cuanto el Papa dice una herejía, ya deja de ser Papa. No tiene que ser así, no es tan tajante la cosa. No tiene que ser así, no es tan tajante la fe, porque se cree en algo que no es católico, y entonces es ahí donde los cargos eclesiásticos quedan vacantes. Entonces no es nada más así, dice una herejía y deja de ser Papa, no. Entonces no es nada más así, dice una herejía y deja de ser Papa, no, es, si la herejía es constante, permanente, pertinaz, ¿verdad? Que es hasta cuando ya le podemos llamar herejía formal. Herejía formal.
No puede Cristo nuestro Señor permitir que su vicario, su otro yo en la tierra, predique la mentira. No puede ser. No es que no debe ser, no puede ser.
Y quiero aclarar, padre, aquí, si me permite, que esta afirmación que nosotros hacemos no es como quien se atribuye el papel de juez, el cargo de juez, porque eso sería una usurpación de nuestra parte. Y además existe ese principio de que la Santa Sede, la sede primada, no puede ser juzgada por nadie. Entonces ese también es otro punto que muchas veces no se ha comprendido.
But you're going to sit in judgment of him and say, well, I'm not going to accept this, and I'm not going to accept it, but he's still the Pope. A contradiction. There was an interesting interview by Bishop Fillet with some British reporter, and he went very methodically. He said, Bishop Fillet, do you believe in a papacy? I believe in a papacy. Do you believe he's the vicar of Christ? I believe he's the vicar of Christ. Do you believe that he is the supreme head of the church? I believe he's the supreme head of the church. In your constitutions of the Society of St. Pius X, you say that you owe him reverence and obedience. Yes, yes, I do. Then why were you consecrated without his permission? Why did you get consecrated? He did not give you permission. In fact, you were forbidden. And they zoomed the camera in on Bishop Fillet, and he's like, coming out. I mean, he's stuck. He's stuck because he knows he's in a contradiction. Whether he wants to admit it or not, he's in a contradiction. Because the bottom line is that if these men are Pope, you have no authority to establish churches and chapels and things all around the world and completely disregard him. That's not the Catholic faith, it's not the Catholic Church. But it gets to this, as we were talking about in the beginning of this short lecture, just as we see our government being infiltrated and our country being destroyed from within, that's exactly what happened in the Catholic Church. This is nothing new. The Masons said for years they would try to destroy the Catholic, disobey him. There's some who have adopted what they call a material pope theory. And that is that these men have been validly elected, but because of their erroneous or their heretical teachings or beliefs, God has not given them the authority. So somehow they're in between. They're elected, but they don't have. If ever it should appear that any bishop or cardinal of the Roman Church or legate, or even the Roman pontiff, prior to his promotion as cardinal, prior to his election as the Roman pontiff, has beforehand deviated from the Catholic faith or fallen into any heresy, we enact, decree, determine, define such promotion or election, even in and of itself, even with the agreement and unanimous consent of all the cardinals, shall be null, legally invalid, and void. Nor shall it become possible for such a promotion or election to be deemed valid or be valid through reception of office, consecration, subsequent elimination, or possession. And it says, such promotion or election, even through the lapse of time, shall not, in the foregoing situation, be considered even partially legitimate in any way. Those promoted or elected by the very fact and without the need for any further declaration shall be deprived of dignity, possession, honor, title, authority, and power and office. Now, what's interesting, we've talked about this before, on the backside is very small print, but this is the text of the Code of Canon Law 1917. And this decree of Pope Paul IV is referenced in the Code of Canon Law. In the footnotes tell you the references for these canons. And one canon says that you automatically, without a declaration, lose your position in the church. And it's Canon 188, number 4. Number 4 is, if you publicly defect from the faith. You publicly defect from the faith, you have tacitly resigned your office, you don't have any position in the church without a declaration. It's already warning to these false popes and warns them, and then he's not the pope, and then the church can solve it that way. That was the position of Bishop Gerard de Laurier, the material pope theory, etc., and for myself, we've argued much in a time with Bishop McKenna back in the 80s about this. How could this be? A man's part pope, part not the pope. He's validly elected, but he doesn't have any authority. He can appoint cardinals and bishops, but he can't speak infallibly. How do you come up with this? Where does this come from? This is not the language of the church. The church's language is this: public heretics cannot be elected to the papacy, and if a pope were to become a public heretic by the personal sin of heresy, he would forfeit, he would lose his position within the church. So there are many, many things going on out there amongst the traditionalists. You get on the internet, there's so many different opinions, etc. But the important thing is this: we have to stick with what the Catholic Church has taught. They have the right to the position of sacraments. However, I would have this caveat this morning that if you have children and they're hearing from the Pope, we ought to pray for the Pope so that he comes back to the faith, we ought to pray for his conversion, and stuff like that, that's confusing them. And I think with Pius X, more and more I hear of them compromising in different areas of accepting things that are novus ordo, whether it's the communion fast, or no, you can eat on Friday, or not observing a Lenten fast.
El concepto de mal papa. Él es el vínculo de la unidad. Él es el vínculo de la unidad.
Hola gringo, al ser una tesis elaborada después de la vacancia de la Santa Sede es discutible.
No existe el concepto de mal.
Es el fundamento de toda autoridad en la Iglesia. Cuando un papa cae en herejía manifiesta, lo que ocurre es que pierde la fe y con ello pierde su cargo automáticamente, ipso facto, como dice técnicamente el derecho canónico, por el mismo hecho. No es que nosotros lo estemos juzgando, como algunos acusan. Simplemente estamos reconociendo un hecho que el mismo derecho canónico y la tradición teológica nos enseñan. Entonces, ¿estamos juzgando al Papa? Una de las críticas más comunes que hemos escuchado, sobre todo recientemente, contra nosotros es: ¿cómo se atreven a juzgar al Papa? Eso está prohibido. Y aquí es importante aclarar algo muy esencial. No estamos juzgando al Papa. Estamos resistiendo al error y la herejía. La Sagrada Escritura nos lo enseña claramente. San Pablo mismo nos cuenta en la carta a los Gálatas que resistió al mismísimo San Pedro cuando su conducta, aquí San Pablo no estaba juzgando la autoridad. ¿Cómo se atreven a juzgar al Papa? Eso está fe. Y con ello pierde su cargo automáticamente, ipso facto, como dice técnicamente el derecho canónico, por el mismo hecho. Herejía manifiesta. Lo que ocurre es que pierde la fe y con ello pierde su cargo automáticamente, ipso facto, como dice técnicamente el derecho canónico.
No soy sede vacantista. La Asociación Sacerdotal Trento ya no es sede vacantista. Repito, Trento ya no es sede vacantista. Ja, 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 ja. La sede no está vacante. Bueno, ¿cómo le vamos a decir? Yo les propongo esto: sede misteriosa. Suena bonito.